Greetings, fellow humans that care deeply about institutional child abuse. You're tuning in to an emergency update action-focused episode of Troubled. This is our independent podcast by survivors of institutional child abuse for survivors and the general public. We've been really focused on making sure that we center, elevate, amplify, and focus on Indigenous voices during this last year of investigations into the federal boarding school initiative. The first report, which we had expected to come out in June per one of our last episodes where we did discuss this, did come out last week. I've been working on an episode on this since then. The report itself is over 100 pages. There are about 12 hours of survivor testimonial that have gone officially online. And I do want to use some clips of that. And I do want to make sure everyone is linked to that because I know a lot of you are like me and prefer the self-education route. And that's exactly the type of proactive allies and advocates that we're here for. So I will be linking to all of those things. Please check the show notes today. All of the action items that I will be laying out will be in the show notes. They'll be linked. If you have any issues with that per whatever platform you're using, please let us know. We only have a few days to make some of these action items happen, and these are absolutely imperative. I cannot be more clear. So unfortunately, what we've seen with the government when they finally start to investigate residential schools and these systemic abuses of youth, they give us a very short time to bring forth survivor testimonial. This has been our experience as a nonprofit, as an advocacy team, the entire time that we've been working independently or with each other. This is something that we've experienced both on state levels as well as federally. So the report on the federal boarding school initiative investigation, it was the volume 1 was released, and they announced that there were less than 2 weeks for survivors of the residential schools in the United States to submit their testimony. So as of now, it is far less than 2 weeks. In an effort to be most effective, let's keep this super brief. If anybody needs any clips from this for social media sharing, definitely just hit us up or tag us at Talk Troubled on all the socials if you're posting so that we can amplify. Survivors and their descendants only have until May 26th to submit testimony. So the National Boarding School Healing Coalition is requesting people who attended a boarding school or their descendants to submit them in writing. They've created a template. It's in our show notes. Everything is linked in our show notes. You can email submissions to hnrcdocs@mail.house.gov. And please CC info at nabshc.org. That's for the National Boarding School Healing Coalition. This is something that we ask people to do in our realm of advocacy too. When you're submitting a reporter request, especially escalated to like AGs or state or federal, please CC the nonprofits, the survivor-focused nonprofits or the advocacy groups that you're working with to document your attempts to communicate. In the event that, say, the White House is like, we only got 10 survivors, now you've got the National Boarding School Healing Coalition is like, absolutely not. We were CC'd on 3,000 testimonies. So this is why this is requested. Again, everything is in the show notes, including a template of what you need to include. If somehow you're tuning into this and you don't know about the residential schools or the federal boarding school initiative, check the episode from last week. I will be doing an incredibly in-depth version, and I will have the PDF, my highlighted and notated version, available to y'all. Also, I hope that because this is something that everyone in this space has been waiting for, that you will be eager to proactively participate and be there as a witness for these survivors. And I know that this is something that we speak on quite a lot. And so I just really want to re-clarify and reconfirm our position as institutional child abuse survivors, as troubled teen industry survivors, especially for those of us who are the private pay funnel that look like me, that come from white America, suburbia. It's absolutely imperative that we recognize our responsibility in this movement as a support system. It's imperative that we are centering, amplifying, and elevating Indigenous advocates, Indigenous survivors. We should not be speaking over them or using this as some sort of search engine optimization media moment where we can be like, oh, me too, samesies. These, just like our own, are historically invalidated, gaslit, and silenced communities. If we can understand that, then we should absolutely respect that, and we can model the kind of allyship that we expect. And as someone who's particularly hyperfixated on the residential schools, I was thrilled, you can quote me, thrilled to see how clearly this report was about the intentions of these programs. Not that it wasn't obvious to any of us who listen to survivors, who have read the Kennedy reports or anything up until now, but it was very validating, I would hope, for these communities to have the United States government report just very clearly say that the Indigenous family is incredibly close. Their entire goal was land acquisition, and they realized that because these communities actually had family, actually had community, unlike the colonists and their culture, that they had to destroy the relationships by removing their children from them and effectively making them strangers and enemies to their own communities. And I am not going to get into any further details. A lot of you know them, and we will get into them, I promise. But I do want to keep this less trigger warning-y because I do expect that this will be shared with survivors who did not sign up to be re-traumatized by listening to me. The U.S. investigation was kicked off by our first Indigenous leader, the Secretary of Interior, Deb Haaland, after the original 215 children were discovered at the Kamloops Residential School in Canada. A reminder, again, more in detail on last week's episode, but we're over 10,000 in Canada. Please follow and support the Indigenous survivor-led nonprofit Children First Society in Canada. And again, in Ireland, the number of children that the state and church put in mass graves is over 9,000. And this is what kicked off this investigation, which we are now hoping will lead to a complete review of, again, the children in the United States. And reminder, if you didn't listen to last week's episode, we have discovered children in the U.S. kicked off again because of Kamloops and everything in Canada, but we have only discovered and returned 9 children from the infamous Carlisle School to Redbud Sioux Nation. Go to the show notes and sign the petition on change.org for a thorough investigation of all residential school property in the United States to find all children that were killed through the genocidal politics of assimilation by the United States government, and often in correlation with the church. Because, yeah, all you religious program survivors will not be surprised to know that over 50% of these facilities were affiliated with the church, and that originally when this kicked off, the United States, even in acknowledgement of their alleged separation of church and state, decided to just rock with the missionaries and put the missionaries on the reservations and create an armed forces for them through the literal war. I said I wouldn't get into this. We'll get into it later. Sign the petition and share the hell out of that petition. Also, check the show notes. There are 2 bills. You know, there's a Senate and a House bill. They go side by side. They're the same thing. HR 5444 and S2907. They are linked in the show notes. There is also a resist bot petition and a text number in the show notes that you can interact with to help support this legislation. Any of y'all with platforms, they need to be using those platforms like we're using with our podcast and our 250,000 followers on TikTok. It's imperative that you have these action items in your link tree and that you're making content about this, because we are on an incredible time limit here. So I definitely promise to keep this under 10 minutes because, again, I want this to be action item and I want to hear less from me on this and more from everyone else. So please follow all the action items in the show notes with a priority on if you're content creators, if you're influencers, if you just like to talk a lot like me, talk to absolutely everyone and make sure that these survivors have access to submitting their testimony, to being involved in this activism, in this access to justice. It is so rare that these moments happen. You guys know how much this impacts mental health. Some of these people have never spoken about this before. So I can't imagine that they're going to get into a place where that's a safe thing to do this quickly and this publicly. So we need to be there to support everyone. If you guys see any mental health funds for survivors pop up or any other mutual aid, please let us know. Also, if you know any local grassroots survivor-run nonprofits and advocacy groups that are nonprofit and our podcast as survivors of institutional child abuse in the U.S. can get behind and support, please let me know. If you're a residential school survivor and you're listening to this and you're like, I could talk on my phone and on my computer like this crazy bitch all day, hit me up. I will definitely walk you through how to set up your own podcast for free. If that's something that you guys find useful, that's something we've helped survivors in our sphere and other advocates do, we can absolutely offer that online and available, or we can walk you through it. This is so important. This is so important right now. If survivors are in our space, are going on the media, are going on podcasts, are going on the news, and you guys are not talking about this, expect me to be an asshole. Like, I'm sorry. I'm neurodivergent. It's 200 years, you guys. Like, this is the moment, and this needs to be our focus right now. And so every child matters. Please, please, let's be better allies. Let's do this. If anyone would like to submit any questions, comments, concerns in writing or audio clips to the podcast for our episode on this investigation that'll be coming out probably the end of this week. It's been taking forever. You can email them to us, miranda@talktroubled.org, or you can submit them via the voice message button on our Anchor. All right, go team go. May the force be with us. And also with you.